In this video, we build labels which can show which values are currently selected in the filters. In the previous videos, we built a filter pane which we can show and hide with a button. Then we created a color indicator when something is selected, and we also built a counter showing how many slicers are filtered. It's all well and good, but maybe we also want to see quickly which values are selected in the filters. We will build the labels first in a tooltip and then also directly on the dashboard. Let's get into it. If you open the Power BI file, you can see a customer churn dashboard of a bank. And in the top right corner is the filter button. If you click on it, the filter pane shows up. You can select some slicers. And then you see how the color changes. We have this filter counter here and also the tooltip showing which slicers are filtered. And now whenever we hover over the button, we want to show, instead of which slicers are filtered, the exact values which are selected for these slicers. And how we want to do it is to check first which slicers are filtered. And additionally, we also check which values are selected of these filters. We can start by creating some measures for showing the selected values. We can concatenate, combine these values, and we can actually use quick measures for that. If you navigate on the Home tab and then click on Quick Measure, we can select here different calculations. And if you scroll down to the bottom, there is this concatenated list of values. Click on that. And here we can add the data, a column, which we want to concatenate the values of. Let's open our filter pane again and see what columns are we using in the slicers. For example, geography, we use the geography column. We can drag it on the field and number of values before truncation, meaning how many values should be shown when we select multiple elements before it's being cut off. We have a lot of filters here, so we will need a lot of space for that. Let's keep it at 2 only, and then we can click on Add. And here you go, we have a quick measure. How it works, it checks first the number of values which are currently selected. And here is this number which we selected to put as the maximum values being shown. And then it checks if the actual number of values available are higher than that number. If it is higher, it's going to truncate it, meaning it creates a table here in the top end with this number of values which we maximally allowed. It's going to be 2, and it lists those values. And then it takes this table and concatenates these values. And after that, it combines this concatenated list with this etc. That would be this nested function. And in the other case, when we have 2 or less values selected only, it simply concatenates them. Let's see how it looks in a card. Let's put the list of geography in it. And as you can see, if nothing is selected, it shows all the values actually. That's something we want to take care of later. But if you select something now, it shows only those values which are selected. Up to 2 values. If we select 3 values, it cuts off the last value. Let's create another quick measure. Now for this credit score, let's click on that. And we use this credit score cluster here. We can put it on the field. Number of 2 is okay, and then edit. And this is the same. Let's see how it works if you put it in the card. My 1 value is selected, very good. But if you select multiple values, yeah, it works the same way. But one thing we might want to change is to control in which order the values are being shown. The credit score cluster is sorted by this credit score cluster sort column. So if you go back into the list of our credit score clusters, we also want to change the sorting in these concatenate tables here. We have to change it at 3 places: in the top end table, in the concatenate X table here, and also in the concatenate X input table here. First, let's start with the top end. If you look at it, here is the order by expression. So this value gives the sorting order here, so we can change it to sort. And this is not working because it requires a single value, and if you put the entire column there, in this table, this column doesn't show up, so it cannot identify which sorting number belongs to which cluster. We could put it into an aggregate function, let's say max. So it returns one single value for all the clusters. Now it is accepted, but the listing looks weird. Actually, it shows all the three values which we selected, and still the order is not all right. And the reason for that is if this max function is calculated on this table, it actually returns the same max value, which is the highest sort number for all the clusters. And the reason for that these values creates a virtual table. And if we calculate the maximum values within this table, the rows don't filter these maximum values. It looks at the entire cluster sort column and then picks the maximum number of them and returns this in every single row in this table. What we want to do here is using calculate, which will turn these credit score cluster values in every row into a filter. That's the context transition. So let's put calculate like this. And what happens in the background is that the max values of the sort column are filtered by the cluster names, and only the corresponding value is returned to the clusters. Also here in the visual, we have some changes already, but we still have to put it in the concatenate values. If you check here in the concatenate x, the next value is going to be the order expression. We can just copy the same value. And also in the other case, we can copy this, then click OK. And now when we select something like this, fair, poor, very good, alphabetically the very good should be at the end, but now they are ordered in the same way we have it in the slicer. Now let's create a third list of values. Again, we want to have this concatenated list of labels, and this time let's put this credit card holders in it. Has credit card label, number of truncation values 2, and let's edit. And in this case, we have only two values, holding and not holding. And also the order H comes before the end, so the alphabetical order is fine for us. We can leave it as it is. We will never have this case that it shows etc, but it's okay. It shows both values if both values are selected. These are the three different cases we have here with these slicers. We are not going to create the other list elements because I already did that for you. If you open the slicer label folder here, we have all the labels already, and we are going to work with these directly. You can delete these three quick measures. I just wanted to show how they work. We can also delete this card. And next, we want to combine all these labels into one measure. And we want to do it with a switch function, ordering all the labels to the corresponding slicer names. For that, we can create a new table with all the slicer names. I already created one. If you click on this slicer table and go to this table view, we have all the slicer names listed. And we have also a sorting column to sort them, not alphabetically, but in the same way, we have them also in the filter pane. I simply created this table by entering the data manually. We can go back to the report view. And now the visual we want to use for the labels is this slicer new visual. We can add our slicer columns to it with the names, put it on the field. And these are going to be the labels. We can sort them in the same way. We have them in the filter pane. Let's go to visuals, layout, overflow, and direction is horizontal. Now we have the same order in all the columns. And now we want to have the selected values also here. I'm gonna turn off the quick measures here. So going to callout values, if you open the label here, we can add some labels. These would be values below the slicer names. And we can add the field here, but yeah, we can add only a single value here. That's why we want to combine the labels into one measure. So let's create a new measure. This is going to be active slicer labels. And I'm going to put it in a variable because later we will add other parts to it. But for now, it's going to be this slicer label, the only variable in the function. Switch, we are going to use a switch function, looking at the selected value of this slicer column. And if the column has the value geography, it should return the geography label. If it has the value gender, it should return the gender label, and so on. In the download files, you can also find a text file, and I put all the measures there, so you can just copy it. I'm also going to copy it simply. After listing all the values and closing the switch function, we can return it after the return slicer label. Hit enter. And now we can add it onto our label field, and we see the concatenated values. If you remember, if nothing is selected, it shows everything. So this is not what we want. What we want is that it shows only the selected values. And if nothing is selected, then it shows nothing. For that, we are going to create a new measure, and we need to check two things with it. First of all, whether the actual slicer is filtered or not. We are going to use an isFiltered function for it. And the other thing we want to check if this slicer is the matching slicer where the values belong. I'm going to show what I mean by that. Let's create a new measure. Let's call it slicer is filtered equals, we are going to use a switch function again. In this case, put true. So if the expression is true, then we want to return 1. And what is the expression? The first check is filtered geography. If the geography field filtered, then return 1. Then the next one is filtered gender, then return also 1. And now this is checking whether these fields are filtered or not. And if they are, it's going to return 1. But the other thing we want to check, because it's always going to return 1 when anything is filtered, we want to make sure that the filtered slicer is the same slicer we have here in these buckets. So for example, credit score is filtered now. It's going to return 1, but it's going to return 1 to all the values because something is filtered. So we want to make sure that it checks only the selected value. I hope it was clear. What we have to put here is selected value, and that the slicer is actually the geography slicer. And if the two conditions are met, then only then return 1. You can copy the measure again from this text file. I'm also just going to copy it. And now if you copy this visual and we put this slicer is filtered on the labels, you see that it shows 1, but only for the slicers which are filtered. If we didn't have these and selected values here, let's see what would happen. I just temporarily remove them. It just returns 1 in every card. Let's go back. So that's the reason for that. Then what we want to do is to modify these active slicer labels in a way that it shows the values only in the cases if this slicer is filtered measure equals to 1. So let's go back to the active slicer labels measure. We are going to add some values. Here we will add var slicer filtered equals slicer is filtered. Then we will add another variable here, where show slicer label equals, and then if slicer filtered equals to 1, then show slicer label, and then we close the parentheses. So if it doesn't equal to 1, then it's going to default to a blank value. And in the return, we also add show slicer label. Click OK. And now you can see that it only shows the selected values for the corresponding slicers. We don't need this visual here anymore. I'm going to delete it. And we are going to format this one. Let's go to Format Visuals, Shape. You can turn it into a rounded rectangle and add a 20 pixel rounding. And we can keep the rounded corners at 25 pixel. Then go to Layout. We can reduce the space between the buttons to 4 pixels. And the overflow, this is fine, how is it? Then we can go to callout values, change the font to Segway UI and 8 pixel. Change the color to this medium gray. Then scroll down, we can open the labels. We can change the font to Segway UI semi-bold, and the color is fine. Then remove the space between the label and the value, 0 pixels. Skip the images and go to buttons. The padding is going to be custom, and we will remove the top and bottom paddings to save some space. Let's see how it looks now. You can go that small. The rounding is not very nice, so let's change it to 20 pixels instead. Then scroll down back to the buttons. And the text is also pretty close to these edges here. An ideal distance would be that the text starts where the rounding ends. I already checked and we need around 16 pixels for that. So this starts nicely, uniquely here. We can go to the border and change it to the lightest gray. We can leave the fill as it is. Let's go to General, remove the title, Effects. And for the background, we can add the same color we have here in the background. Let me check. Canvas background. This F5, F5, F5. Let's go back. Background again, effects. Yeah, select the same color. We can resize it a bit, make it even smaller, like this. And this is going to be in a tooltip, so we can create a new page, a tooltip page. Go to Canvas settings, page information, allow users tooltip. And for the size, let's check how big is this visual. Go to selected, go to general. Let's round it up, 140 by 576. So our page size is going to be the same. Custom, 140 by 576. And now we are just going to copy the visual. After that, we want to add the tooltip to this button. If you click on Actions and Tooltip, we already have a function, a measure, and unfortunately we cannot add the report page. We can only add report page for visuals which are showing data or have the capability to show data, and the button cannot do that, although you can add the measure to it. So we need to put a new visualization, for example, a card, and I'm just going to add XXX value. Just gonna add it to it. And here, if you go to the formatting, general, and turn the tooltips on, we can add the report page as a tooltip. When you hover over it, it shows the selected slicer values. And we have some options how to do it. We could either put something next to it, like a question mark or an information button or whatever. But what I would do is to put this card directly on the number. We can make this button very small for the same size. Then the value is not rendering anymore. To remove the value colors, we can go to visual callout value and we add the transparent color to it. Field values, I have a transparent color measure. And now the 3 dots are disappeared. The transparent color measure is simply a white F code with a 0% opacity. Then going back to our card, formatting, effects, we can remove the background and we can position it on our visual here. I'm gonna make it larger, having the same size. And to round the corners, we can add the visual border, change the rounding to 30 pixels, and then we can remove the border again. So now the labels are only available when we hover over this number here. There is a disadvantage if you click on it. It's not going to activate the button, so it's kind of weird that one part of a button is disabled from the action, but I think it still works here. You see also the hover effects, it only affected when you hover over this, but not if you are hovering over the number. And if you clear all the visuals, if you clear all the slicers here, we have this 0. But let's select something again. Credit card holders, then let's say salary range, and also active members. And what would be great here is if only the slicers would be shown where a value is selected. And actually we have the option to do that. If you go back to the tooltip and put the active slicer labels on the tooltips within this visual, and then go back to the page, hover over the button, and now we only see those slicers which are selected. The thing is that it renders badly, in my opinion, so it's very large, and also we cannot change the tooltip size dynamically. It would be cool if these little brackets would stay the same size, but it's not possible, so I would keep it this time simply like this, showing all the values. But what we could do is to highlight them a little bit. So whichever values are selected, they could have the same purple color indicator. So let's go back to tooltip, and then just going to change here the callout values, labels. Let's change it to the same purple. This is this hex code we need. And then we navigate back and check it again. Now all the selected values are purple. It attracts the eye a bit more, so it guides the attention more quickly to the selected values. One addition I would make is, in case if none of the values are selected, let's clear the selection. In this case, I would rather show a message that there are no active filters currently. So let's go back to the tooltip. We are going to add the button to it. It's going to be a blank button. The style, we can remove the border and the icon, and we will add a conditional text to it. Let's create a new measure for that. And this is going to be tooltip cover. If the number of active filters, so nothing is filtered, equals 0. And if you remember from the previous video, the count active filters returns a text. So the 0 has to be in these quotation marks. So if it's 0, give the message no active filters. And if it's not 0, just default to blank. So we can close the parentheses. Then now we can add it as a text. Tooltip cover. I also changed the measure name to tooltip cover text. We can make it segue UI semi-bold. We can change the font size to 14 pixels. And we also want to color the background. For that, we can create a new measure. I'm just going to copy this tooltip cover text, the new measure. And this is going to be background. And if the count of active filters is 0, return a white background. This is the hex code for it, 610F. And in case it's not 0, then it's going to be also white, but completely transparent. So we will have no background. Click OK, and then enable the fill in the button, and then we will add this color as a conditional formatting. Tooltip cover background, click OK, and remove the transparency completely. Now it's white. Let's see how it looks on the normal page. No active filters, but as soon as we select something, it shows the selected values. So this was the first case showing these slicer values in a tooltip. But what if we want to show them directly on the canvas? We are going to copy the tooltip. Okay, let's go to View, Selection, and let's copy this slicer visual back to our dashboard. And here we could arrange it differently. Going to format your visual, layout. We are going to have one row and let's say 5 columns, and we can resize it. But here actually we can take advantage of this tooltips field here. If we put the active slicer labels here, it's only going to show the selected values. It's only going to show the slicers where a value is selected. And somehow horizontally it doesn't fill the entire visual, so it keeps the sizing. That's really good for us. How to arrange it? Well, it would be great if you could right align them directly next to the filter, because it's kind of like hanging in the middle, like maybe you are not sure what do they show. It would make more sense if they would fill up from the other side, but it's not possible. What we can do instead is to move the filter button and actually rearrange the entire dashboard. Obviously, depending on how much space do you have. Here we are just going to make everything smaller. Drag these two groups here. And now let's move this entire filter button. Gonna group everything and we can move it down to the left side. Align it properly. And then we can move the labels directly next to it. Here I'm going to go to Formatting, General, Effects. I'm going to turn off the background. Then go to Visual, Buttons, and we will remove also the fill. Because now this is a gray background within these labels, we can make everything a bit sharper. For example, the borders, we can make it this second gray, so a bit darker. And then we can go to the callout values, and also make the values a bit sharper, so darker. And in this case, I don't think that the purple colors are necessary here because we don't have to emphasize them that much anymore. So we can change the color back to this dark gray. And then we want to check what is the worst case, like in which cases first are the labels are the longest, and how does it render if we have every possible slicer selected. So let's go back to the filter pane. In fact, we can move the entire thing on the other side below the button. And the longest possible label is in this credit score if we select the largest values and +1 value. And we can already see that it doesn't render properly. But also let's select every possible slicers, something. And we can already see that we have some issues there, because we have this slide and that takes away space. I'm gonna make everything a bit larger. So first of all, we can remove this slide, select the visual, go to Formatting, Layout, then Overflow. And instead of continuous scroll, we can select Paginated. And in this case, it shows 5 elements because we added that 5 columns should be shown. We could turn it into 6, but there you see that this is still a bit small, so we can make it actually a bit larger. And we can extend it right up to the end. So this entire row is dedicated for these slicers now. I'm going to close the filter pane. And it's still not showing all the slicers at the same time. It's a compromise we have to make because of the size limitations, that we have to click one time to see the rest of the slicers. You can consider it like what are the chances that someone is going to select every possible thing. If it's pretty common and you want to show everything, then you might have to play with some different solutions, having 2 rows, for example. Also, if you have 2 rows, you will have the rendering issue again. So this is problematic. Then probably it's better to stick with the tooltip. Currently, we can activate this slicer. It doesn't do anything, but you can still click on it. We shouldn't be able to interact with it, so we can cover it with a shape, insert a shape, and position it in a way that it keeps these pagination areas free. So it only covers the labels themselves. Also here on the other side, it should only cover the label, but not the pagination area. Then go to style, remove the fill, remove the border. Then here, going back to the button, we don't need this tooltip anymore, so we can remove this card. And we could also remove this counter. It's not necessary because we show everything directly, but I'm just gonna leave it there now. And then we clear everything, then everything is removed. If you really want to go the extra mile and put the cherry on top, we can even improve it further. For example, we can add some icons to it to make it more engaging. I cover it in this video how to do it with the help of Figma.